Oh yeah, I guess if we can do it twice. So, yeah, I just want to talk about virtual particles for a minute because, to my mind, they're the link between the physical and the mind, like material and mind.
And the mind is what you were referring to earlier as consciousness?
Yeah, original consciousness. I'm sure there's a difference, but I don't know what. But anyway, doesn't matter. So let's start with original consciousness.
Okay.
Right, so we're just basically pure mind, although that would include heart and everything else too. So there's this concept that you get out of quantum mechanics called virtual particles. So it turns out that space is not just sort of a background to everything, but if two particles come into existence, both a particle and its antiparticle, they can just pop into existence, exist for a tiny little amount of time, and then they reunite.
Really?
Yeah, and so the whole idea is that space and time itself is a very sort of active place. Let me try to draw that. So what happens is you start with nothing, just a dot, and then that becomes like a matter and antimatter. Right, so I'm going to put them as positive and negative. And then they would just reunite, okay? So they would go back into where they started. So the idea is that these two can exist for a certain time given by delta E times delta T has to be less than or equal to something H bar, something like that. Anyway, I forget how it works. But it's a very small amount of time. And so we call these virtual particles because they can pop into existence and then pop out again.
But once they're reunited, aren't they existing?
No, because they've gone back into wherever these things came from. So yeah, so to my mind, that they're actually sort of gone back into consciousness or the sort of the whatever underlies space and time. So now these are not material. However, if you were to put a force field across these
while they're separated,
while they are separated, you can actually separate them. So let's say that you put on some kind of a field like this. Okay, and it's acting downwards. So then what happens is that instead of reuniting, these particles can actually pick up some of the energy from this force field. And in that case, I'll call that force field F. In that case, these particles become real. Okay. So they get separated because the positive one will go one way and the negative one will go the other way because the force acts on them differently.
I understand that. I sort of understand that. But what about the negative sign that you said is antimatter?
Well, I'm calling it, if one of them is positive, the other one's going to be negative because they have everything sort of opposite from each other.
Yeah.
So I'm just using positive and negative because we're used to being able to separate them with a force.
But you said antimatter.
It is actually antimatter.
But from the movies, antimatter's bad.
Yeah, but we don't have any. So I'll show you where they go. Okay. So now the point is, so this is sort of halfway between conceptual and real. Right. You start with a concept and it will remain a concept unless you put it in a force field where it picks up some real energy.
Some type of energy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to say, how about if the universe starts with a concept of an infinite amount of mass or of an infinitely dense point, right? Which is sort of what we call a singularity in physics. It's the central point of a black hole.
Okay.
So you've just got a point and potentially everything exists within that one point. Okay. So let's suppose then we put on space and time. We decide conceptually that we've got a space-time. We're putting this within space-time.
Okay.
So space and time are all like folded up around this point. Okay. And this is what we would actually refer to now as a black hole. Right? So it turns out, right, so here's our singularity right at the middle. And then around it, you've got space and time. The geometry is so totally wound up and folded up because everything would be pointing inwards towards that central point. So it turns out, and Stephen Hawking found this, that in this sort of a geometry, you can arrange it so that it actually picks up from the gravitational field.
Because it's energy anyway. It's some kind of force
Some
field.
kind of force field, right? It picks up the force field such that the antimatter particle gets swallowed into the black hole, right? While the matter particle goes out into the universe. Now, this is what he used to show that a black hole actually does eventually decay into something observable. So a black hole doesn't just stay like a black hole, but it actually gives out particles. Now, you don't really see this very much because it takes forever and ever. But basically, this mechanism, whereby you start with a virtual particle and turn it into a real particle while the antimatter antiparticle gets swallowed back, I think this is where the universe came from.
Well, that makes sense because it's like transferring consciousness into a concrete kind of.
So you see, you picked it up right away that the force field is the consciousness. Yeah. So to my mind, the force that we're using here is the directed energy of consciousness. It has to be directed because I think force sort of implies a direction, right?
For sure, yeah.
So I think that we might consider that to be sort of the will of this original consciousness. The original consciousness wills this into being, and the psychic energy is actually what powers the whole universe.
And that's why Power of Intention, The Secret, and that's how it's possible. That it's not just a figment of somebody's imagination that they believe it works, because it actually does.
Yeah, because actually what this says is that our minds are like way more powerful than we thought.
Right, and that's right. And that plays into what we're only using 20% of our brain or something like that. What if we were using 25?
Oh.
30? You know?
I don't know about that. But I mean, it does show that we should be able to have some actual, our desire, if we can find a deep enough point of desire within our own being, it should be able to have some sort of real physical effect in this universe through this mechanism.
Sure, because, yeah, people are proclaiming all the time that this is just like I imagined it, or I really wanted this, or, so people actually bring their own invisible desires to fruition. So along the same line, we have to say that the original consciousness is at least as capable as a human to bring about creation, right? Yeah,
but there's a couple of things. So first of all, the original consciousness is not fully in control down here. Right?
Well, is that why Hawkins is so adamant about not having an actual God?
I think Stephen Hawking changes his mind every now and again about that
one.
I think so too. But I don't know, really. I have read his books, but not recently, so I'm not quite sure.
I think recently he just made the proclamation again that there is no God.
Probably, yeah. He does that occasionally, I think. But what it shows is how you can see a material particle automatically contains within it the whole dimension of consciousness. Right? You can't get a material particle without putting into it this directed energy of consciousness, directed psychic energy. So it also puts into everything the whole dimension of meaning. So you see that everywhere. Humans are not happy without meaning. Even the universe has meaning. It's just this incredible book called Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas really explains that very clearly. That's one of my favorite books. But anyway, I think this is great because to me this shows that matter is not, just inert.
Right.
Matter,
it's not just stuff.
Yeah,
it comes from somewhere.
Well, and
it's created.
It's sort of like a panpsychic view of the universe. This is panpsychism, really, that everything has some dimension of psychic energy within it.
Why would people refute this?
I think through most of history people haven't. I think people have sort of assumed this. Well, not maybe about, they didn't really know about virtual particles and so on. I mean, this is just something that seems to me, I mean, who knows? This, I don't know. Physicists would definitely have a hard time with this right away to say that there's psychic energy powering the universe. But there's no, I can't see that they can deny it. I don't see it. Right?
Okay,
I don't see that there's anything that can contradict this. All right, let's
Okay, there
stop
you
that
go.
and take it up again.
Excellent. Thank you.